This week we are going to be learning to retell the story of Little Red Riding Hood. We've done a lot of talking about Little Red Riding Hood over the past few weeks, and this week we want to get really good at telling the story all by ourselves. So the first thing we're going to think of when we're telling a story is how we start the story. There are lots of fantastic ways that we can start a story, and I've got some of the ideas here. This first one here says once upon a time. I bet you've heard lots of stories that start with once upon a time. You might hear, once upon a time there was a little girl called Little Red Riding Hood. The next one that we've got here, next idea is on a fine sunny day. I can imagine that might have been the kind of day that Little Red Riding Hood went out walking in the forest. On a fine sunny day, Little Red Riding Hood decided to take a basket of treats to her grandmother's house. The final one we've got here, it's even got a picture of the wolf and Little Red Riding Hood on. It says, did you ever hear the story of? So you could start your story with, did you ever hear the story of Little Red Riding Hood? Can you think of any more ways to start a story? You can pause the video and talk to your grown-ups about how you might start a story. Now, when we write a story or retell a story, we need to think about the order that we do things in. So we are going to look at what happens first in the story. So this word here is first. So first, what happens in the story is Little Red Riding Hood takes her basket of food and walks off through the forest to go to grandmother's house. So I'm going to write a sentence to start the story. I'm going to start my story with once upon a time, okay? So I'm going to start my story with once upon a time. Now, if you need any help with spelling that, if you decided to use that, you can go back and have a look at it on here, once upon a time. So I'm going to write it as the beginning of my story. Once, because these are not words that are easy to sound out. Once upon a time. So I've started with once upon a time. Now I need to think about what my sentence will be to write. Once upon a time, Little Red Riding Hood went to grandmother's house. I'd like you to pause the video and write a sentence for what happens first in the story. Okay, I'm going to finish my sentence now. Once upon a time, Little Red Riding Hood Little Red Little Red Riding Hood. Riding. Now some of these words I will show you where you can find on our video too. Little Red Riding Hood. Oh, and now it's a different kind of oh. It's the digraph oh that we will be looking at next week. Once upon a time, Little Red Riding Hood went. Let's sound out went with our phoneme fist. Went. W. E. N. T. Went to. Tricky word to. T. O. Once upon a time, Little Red Riding Hood went to Grandma's house. Grandma. And went to Grandma's. So once upon a time, Little Red Riding Hood went to Grandma's. That's the first thing that happens in the story. Once we've written the first part of the story, we need to write what happens next. So next, she met a big bad wolf and he rushed to Grandma's house first, didn't he? So that's the next part of the story. So I want you to pause the video and write your sentence for what happens next in the story. Next. So I'm going to write next. She met a big bad wolf. Next, so the word next is written just there for us to copy. Next. Finger space, she, tricky words, she, S-H-E. Next, she met. Let's sound it out with our phoneme fist. Met. M-E-T. Met. Next, she met a big big bad ad. Next, she met a big bad wolf. Full stop. So we've talked about how to start a story with your story opener, such as Once Upon a Time. We've talked about how you need to write about something that happens first. And we've talked about how we then need to write something that happens next, because we have to keep our story in the right order. These are some of the words you might use when you're writing your first and next sentences. Your job today is to make sure you've written a sentence for what happens first in the story and a sentence for what happens next in the story. And we will look at the rest of the story tomorrow.